One autumn afternoon, a 6-year-old girl was found beside her mother, in an apartment stained with blood and silence. She didn't cry, didn't speak, just clutched a worn teddy bear like it held the last pieces of her broken world. Then came Billy, a German shepherd trained to listen to the kind of pain that has no words. And one day, Ella drew her first picture. In it, a half-open door, a man and a secret that made the entire courtroom hold its breath. What happened when Ella began to draw? And why did Billy become the most important witness of the trial? The answers live in every pencil stroke, every gentle touch, and a truth that made an entire town fall silent. The first chill of the season swept through the town of Maplewood, carrying the scent of damp earth and the rustle of deep red maple leaves falling across the cobbled walkways. It was an afternoon that seemed peaceful, until the sound of a police siren broke the silence on Cedar Street, where a distress call had just come from apartment 14B. Someone inside was gravely injured. Chief Nolan was the first to arrive at the scene. He'd seen countless cases in his career, but what waited behind that door tightened something deep in his chest. On the floor, amidst a spreading pool of blood that looked like a shadow of despair, lay a woman, unmoving. Her dark brown hair was tangled and splayed across the tile, her face pale, her chest barely rising and falling. That was the only sign she was still alive. A knife lay near her hand, the handle skewed at an angle, the fingerprints smudged and unreadable. But it was a small, almost inaudible sound that made the entire team pause. A soft breath caught mid-sob coming from behind the curtain by the window. Nolan raised a hand. Everyone froze. He stepped quietly toward it, lifted the fabric, and his heart sank. A little girl, no more than 6 years old, curled up like a fallen leaf, trembling in winter. Her eyes were wide open, but no tears fell. She stared at him, an empty, bottomless stare that didn't belong to a child. "What's your name?" Nolan asked gently. His voice instinctively softened. No reply. "Are you hurt? Is that your mom?" The girl only shrank back slightly, still clutching a worn-out teddy bear to her chest. "It's okay. You're safe now," Nolan whispered, wrapping his coat around her fragile body. At the hospital, the woman was identified as Mila Jensen, 31 years old. She was still alive, but had suffered heavy blood loss with wounds to her chest and head. There were no security cameras inside the apartment, no signs of forced entry. The emergency call came from a neighbor who heard a loud crash followed by broken sobs. Ella Jensen, Mila's only daughter, was the only witness present. From the moment she left that apartment through the medical exam and the quiet ride to Maplewood's Child Protection Unit, Ella didn't speak a single word. Doctors confirmed she had no physical injuries, but the way she stared into space, the way she held her teddy bear, like an anchor, like a lifeline, said enough. The damage wasn't visible. It was inside. "I believe she's experiencing severe post-traumatic shock," one of the child psychologists said during the emergency debriefing. "The worst thing we could do now is push her to talk. The more pressure we apply, the deeper she'll retreat." Nolan nodded, though the weight in his chest only grew heavier. There were no other witnesses, no footage, no answers. And everything now rested on a 6-year-old who wouldn't speak, wouldn't write, wouldn't react. In the special crisis care room reserved for children, Ella was given a small, pale cream-colored space with a spotless white bed. There were shelves filled with picture books and new stuffed animals in one corner. But she didn't touch any of them. She sat quietly by the window in a little wooden chair, gazing out at the rows of leafless trees. Her eyes didn't blink. It was as if she was searching for something that had vanished forever. Caregivers came and went, reading stories, offering warm smiles, trying every gentle approach they knew. But she stayed silent. Only once did she move differently, when a staff member accidentally dropped her teddy bear while opening the door. Ella darted forward, picked it up, and clutched it tightly to her chest. Then she backed into the corner, curling up against the wall, eyes wide with fear, scanning the room like everyone in it was a threat. A staff member later sighed and murmured to Nolan, "It's like she's frozen." In the last moment, she saw her mother. Everything just stopped right there. The investigation widened, but answers didn't come. Mila's ex-boyfriend, the initial suspect, claimed he hadn't been in Maplewood all week. The police were still digging, but nothing was conclusive. And Ella remained the only key. A key buried in silence and rubble. That night, Nolan stood in the dim hallway outside Ella's room. Through the frosted glass, he could see her on the floor, teddy in her hands, eyes staring at something far away. Something no one else could see. He turned to the staff member beside him and whispered, "We need a different way. Someone or something that could help her feel safe. No questions, no pressure, just presence." He paused. A thought flickered to life. A name that had just returned from PTSD therapy service. A dog who never needed words, who had helped other children learn to speak again, not through commands, but through quiet companionship. Call Billy. Maplewood was the kind of town people skipped past on a map unless they were paying attention. Nestled beside Lake Evermere, the town felt like a soft whisper of peace in a noisy world. In autumn, the maples turned fire-bright. Red like blood orange, like flames, yellow like late afternoon sun. The main road stretched barely a kilometer, passing an old gas station, a family-run grocery store, a cinnamon-scented bakery, and a weathered church with ivy climbing its bell tower. The people were kind, lived slow, and remembered each other's names back 3 generations. So when 4 police cars screamed through that quiet main street, Maplewood shook. News of the assault in apartment 14B sliced through the town's peace like a tear in silk. A young woman on the brink of death. A little girl too stunned to speak. And no one behind bars. People whispered, people worried, but no one spoke too loud. In the middle of all that noise, hidden in silence, Ella was placed in temporary care with Margaret Lane, a seasoned social worker who had spent nearly 20 years helping children find safety again. Margaret lived at the edge of town, where the maple trees opened their arms wide as if embracing the sky. She lived alone, no children of her own, but her door had always been open for the ones who had nowhere else to go. Ella didn't respond when she arrived. She simply followed quietly, still holding the same bear, its nose now tinged with dust. "You'll stay here for a while," Margaret said gently as she opened the door. "No one will force you to do anything. You can stay quiet if that's what you need. I'll be just outside whenever you're ready." Ella walked into the room. It wasn't large, but it felt complete. A single bed with wildflower-printed sheets, a wide window looking out onto the shedding maples, and a small wooden chair tucked neatly beneath the sill. That very night, Ella chose the chair as her safe place. The next day, the wind returned. Maplewood nestled itself beneath a pale gray sky, blanketed by early morning mist. But inside Margaret's home, there was still a flicker of warmth, kept alive by the whistle of boiling tea, the smell of toasted bread, and the soft hum of vintage music drifting through the air, just as it did every morning. Ella didn't touch the toast. She didn't look up when Margaret spoke. But when the music played, her eyes flickered, then lowered again. "Do you like music?" Margaret asked softly, her voice as gentle and familiar as a well-worn wool thread. There was no answer. Ella simply pulled her teddy bear closer, clutching it as though letting go might cause her to shatter. She sat by the window for hours, her fingers resting lightly on the glass. On the other side, the world moved like a film in slow motion. Leaves fell one by one. Squirrels darted across the fence. The postman paused at every wooden mailbox. A tiny town going about its ordinary day, unaware that behind a quiet pane of glass, a little girl had closed the door to her world completely. Margaret invited a speech therapist named Dana Whitmore to help. Dana had worked with children on the spectrum, kids shattered by divorce, even young refugees from war zones. But with Ella, it felt like walking into a maze without a map. She brought picture cards, colored pencils, wax crayons. Ella didn't touch them. She told soft stories, sometimes hummed lullabies. Ella didn't look. She tried puzzles, toy sets, small games. Ella retreated to the corner, clutching her bare face, turned away. "She's not resisting," Dana said quietly after the third session. "But she's not letting anyone in either. It's like she's locked in a silence of her own making." Margaret nodded. "I don't think she's afraid of people. I think she's stopped believing anyone can understand what she wants to say." Each night before turning in, Margaret stood outside Ella's door and peeked in. And every night was the same. Ella curled in the window seat, legs pulled close, head resting on her arm, eyes wide open, gazing into the dark. One rainy evening, Margaret brought in a small blanket. She knelt beside Ella, wrapped it around her gently, then slipped back out. What she didn't know was, behind the closing door, two small eyes had followed her every step. Blinked once, then lowered. 3 days later, a letter arrived from the Maplewood Police Department. It was short, just 3 lines. But in Margaret's hands, it felt like a beam of light cutting through thick clouds. "We've contacted the Animal Assisted Therapy Program. Billy, German Shepherd, is available for deployment. Awaiting your approval." Margaret read the note again and again. She remembered Billy, the dog who helped little Mason climb out of depression after losing his entire family in an accident. A 4-legged warrior who needed no words, who simply showed up and stayed. She turned to look toward Ella's room. The little girl sat as always by the window, teddy bear cradled close. But in her eyes, somewhere behind that long silence, Margaret sensed something waiting. A flicker of light, a silent breath, a longing for someone who could listen, even without a single word. She picked up a pen and wrote just one word, yes. Tuesday morning arrived with a veil of fog stretched gently across Maplewood's rooftops and fading maple trees. The final whispers of autumn rustled through the woods to the east, carrying a chill that made most people want to curl up in blankets and listen to the radio. But on a quiet street at the edge of town, something important was about to unfold. Something no one could promise would work, but everyone quietly hoped for. Margaret stepped outside her iron gate and inhaled. A black SUV was pulling up slowly to the curb. The door opened, and out stepped a man in a brown coat and dark beanie, his weathered face familiar to anyone who had worked in child trauma care. Trainer Kellen Wright. And beside him walked Billy. The German Shepherd moved with a calm grace, not asserting dominance, but impossible to look away from. His coat shimmered in soft amber, and ash tones thick and clean catching the morning light. His ears stood tall, his intelligent eyes quietly scanning the surroundings, not out of fear, but awareness. He wore no leash, just a black collar with a simple nameplate Billy, Certified Trauma Support K9. Margaret walked up, kneeling slightly. "Hello again, Billy," she said, her hand brushing the warm fur at his neck. Billy blinked slowly. His tail swayed gentle and composed. A greeting, not a display. "Where is she?" Kellen asked. "In her room. Still the same. By the window holding that teddy bear." "We'll go slow." Kellen nodded. "Billy knows what to do." Inside the room, Ella sat just as she always did. Back against the wooden chair head, tilted slightly, gaze lost through the misted glass. The bear lay across her lap, her arms clutching it so tightly the ears had crumpled at the seams. When the door opened, she didn't turn. Her eyes followed a bird gliding across the sky. But then came a sound, subtle and unfamiliar, the soft tapping of claws on wooden floor. Her eyelashes fluttered. Billy entered and stopped about 10 feet from her. He didn't bark, didn't wag furiously like other dogs might. He simply stood there, head slightly tilted, watching her with curiosity, without intrusion. Ella didn't move. She glanced toward him, and instantly recoiled, pulling her bear closer, knees tucked in back pressed to the chair. Kellen raised a hand to stop Margaret. Then he knelt down, placed a round mat on the floor, Billy's signal, and gave a soft cue. Place. Billy stepped onto the mat, lowered himself to the floor, and exhaled slowly. His eyes remained aware of Ella, but not fixated. And after a moment, he closed them. 1 minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. No words, no movement. Just the ticking of the clock, the wind brushing against glass, and the steady breathing of a dog who made no demands, who simply shared the silence. Kellen slipped away, leaving Billy behind. Margaret stayed in the hallway, watching through the narrow door crack. She held her breath. Ella hadn't moved, but her eyes no longer looked out the window. They rested on Billy. She didn't reach out, didn't speak, but her grip on the teddy bear loosened. Her hands, once so tense, began to relax. Billy remained still, his head slightly lowered, his presence forming a quiet, warm circle in a room that had long felt frozen in stillness. After a while, Ella lowered her gaze. She looked at the floor, at the soft mat, at the golden fur just within reach. Slowly, ever so gently, her hand slipped down the side of the chair. She didn't reach for Billy, just extended her fingers to the edge of her world, as if leaving a tiny door cracked open. And as though understanding everything, Billy raised his head. He stretched forward and placed his chin softly on her hand. Not too close, not too far, just enough for her to know someone is here. And he's not going anywhere. Margaret turned away, tears streaming down her cheeks. Kellen stood quietly nearby, hands in his pockets, watching the room from a distance. "He doesn't need commands," he said softly. "Billy reads heartbeats. He feels even the slightest shift in her breathing." "You think this will help?" Ella Margaret asked, her voice still trembling. "I don't know," Kellen replied, eyes fixed on Billy's silhouette. "But if anyone can step through the door, she's locked from the inside. It's not someone who needs answers. It's someone who doesn't ask any questions at all." That evening, as Margaret passed by the hallway like she always did, Ella was no longer sitting alone at the window. She was on the floor right beside Billy, still hugging her teddy bear, but her small body leaned gently against the sleeping dog's side. It was the first time she wasn't alone in that quiet corner. The first time the room carried 2 breaths instead of 1. The first time someone had reached into the space inside her heart. By the 4th morning since Billy's arrival, Maplewood was wrapped in a misty drizzle. Rain tapped softly on the window glass, drawing streaks, like the clumsy brushstrokes of a child. In the familiar little room, Ella sat on the floor again, her teddy bear resting between her knees, and Billy lying close beside her head, resting on the old rug. For the first time, Ella watched Billy move. Watched him stretch his legs after sleep, yawn deeply to reveal rows of calm white teeth, tilt his head as he listened to the quiet patter of rain. Billy didn't react. Or maybe he did, but chose not to show it. His presence remained soft, undemanding, like a warm blanket laid gently across a fragile heart. Ella still didn't touch him. But now, whenever she entered the room, the first place her eyes went was to wherever Billy lay. That night, the wind picked up, rattling the branches against the roof. Thunder grumbled faintly in the distance like some sleeping thing preparing to stir. Margaret tucked Ella into bed early. She read her a short bedtime story, like every night. But Ella said nothing. She simply turned her back and curled tighter around her teddy bear. Billy lay at the foot of the bed, his head resting on his front paws, eyelids heavy. A sudden clap of thunder rolled across the hills. Ella flinched, but she didn't scream. It wasn't until the deep hours of the night, when memory crept out from the corners of sleep and filled her mind with broken shards of what she'd seen, that Ella cried. Not loudly, not in sobs, just soft, muffled hiccups from a soul that had been locked in the dark too long. Billy stirred. He circled around the bed, then stopped beside her. He nudged gently toward where she lay. Ella covered her face, trembling. One small hand slipped off the edge of the bed. Billy leaned in and licked it, once lightly, like a whisper. Ella froze, but didn't pull away. Seconds passed. Her breathing calmed. She turned slightly, not all the way, but enough to see his eyes watching her, eyes with no questions, no demands, just presence. That night, Ella fell asleep with her hand resting beside Billy, and in the morning, when Margaret stepped into the room, she found Ella curled on her side, one arm around her bear, the other hand still lightly touching the quiet dog's back. The days that followed had no rules. Margaret still baked bread each morning. Dana still visited with crayons and whiteboards. Billy was always there, walking with Ella into the yard, sitting beside her as she read silent comic books, curling up beneath her chair while she ate. Then one morning, as Margaret washed cups in the kitchen, she heard the soft scrape of a chair moving in the study. She walked to the door. Ella was sitting at the desk. In front of her, a blank sheet of paper and a box of wax crayons. For the first time since arriving in Maplewood, the child chose to do something on her own. Margaret didn't say a word. She just sat outside the door, eyes misting. Ella drew for nearly an hour. Her focus never left the page. And when Margaret finally stepped inside, she saw it. A drawing, still clumsy in shape but full of feeling. On the white paper was a large dog with deep brown fur, upright ears, and kind eyes. Beside him, a little girl with short hair, her face made of 2 dots and a curved line for a smile. There were no flowers, no house, no sun. Just the two of them, standing side by side in the middle of a blank white world. As if for now, all Ella needed was Billy and herself. From that day forward, Ella began drawing every day. And in every drawing, Billy appeared. Sometimes lying under a tree, sometimes sitting by a window, sometimes playing with her teddy bear, sometimes running in the yard, a scarf tied loosely around his neck. Ella never spoke about the drawings, but through each slow, thoughtful stroke, everyone could feel it. Something was melting inside her, like old ice touched by spring. One afternoon, Dana visited as usual. She knelt down beside Ella and gently asked, "This is Billy, isn't it?" Ella looked up. She didn't nod, didn't shake her head. But her eyes met Dana's, then shifted to Billy, with a light that hadn't been there before. Billy, who had been lying quietly on the rug, lifted his head, stretched forward, and rested his chin on the edge of Ella's chair. No one said a word. But in that moment, everyone in the room knew. The child was stepping out of the dark. As late autumn crept further into Maplewood, the air felt heavier. News of the Milla Jensen case had finally broken through the quiet, and though the media didn't scream headlines, the words still pierced like thin needles: mother brutally attacked, daughter still silent. Case with no witness, no cameras, Where will justice land? The Beckings County Courthouse had set the date. A morning in early November. Courtroom 2, ground floor. The one used for juvenile-related felony cases. Inside a private meeting room, police, social workers, attorneys, and the prosecution team sat in a hush so heavy, no one bothered refilling their coffee. No eyewitness, no surveillance. The fingerprints on the weapon were wiped. Everything looks like it points somewhere. But it's not enough, said prosecutor Sandra Klein. On the case board, one name. Grayson Hale. Mila's ex-boyfriend, a man previously accused of emotional abuse, known for violent outbursts. He was the first name that came to everyone's mind, and the one all evidence quietly circled. Grayson claims he was in Chicago that day, Chief Nolan said. He provided bus tickets, hotel receipts, even bar footage from that night. But there's still an unaccounted time gap, and no one can confirm Ella saw him that day. The room fell silent again. All eyes in the room turned to Margaret Lane, the woman who had been by Ella's side since the first day, who had quietly witnessed every small shift in the girl's fragile healing. Margaret spoke gently. She doesn't talk, but she's communicating in her own way. Through drawings, her behavior, the way she responds to Billy. From the corner of the table, an FBI agent slid a folder forward. We've run pilot programs using trauma-informed therapy involving dogs and children. Results were promising, especially when we used non-intrusive audio and visual tools to record unspoken reactions in safe environments. Sandra Klein nodded slowly. You're suggesting we just let her be in the room with Billy and observe, no questions, no pressure, no interrogation, just observation. We let Billy take the lead, and if she truly remembers something, she may find her own way to express it. And we reconstruct the testimony through what she expresses. Colors, symbols, gestures, if there's a pattern. That afternoon, Margaret received a call from Chief Nolan. We'll need your permission, he said. But most importantly, Ella's, in her own way. Margaret didn't answer right away. She sat quietly in Ella's room for a long time, watching the girl coloring on the floor. Billy lay beside her, eyes half closed, though every few seconds he flicked a glance at her crayon strokes as if he were following along. On the page, a new figure began to take shape. A man in a dark long-sleeved shirt standing before a half-open door. Ella outlined his jacket in gray and shaded a shadow behind him in deep black. Ella, Margaret said softly, kneeling beside her. Do you want Billy to help you tell your story? Ella paused. The red crayon still rested in her tiny fingers. She didn't reply, just lowered her head. Billy lifted his head. He moved closer and gently rested his chin in her palm. A quiet glance, a soft stroke across his back. And then Ella nodded. The first session took place in a specially prepared room made to feel like a child's playroom. There were no wall-mounted cameras, no two-way mirrors, just a single discreet camera hidden behind a shelf of stuffed bears. Inside, only Ella and Billy. A large whiteboard, sketch paper, crayons, and a small wooden table. Margaret waited outside, her heart tight in her chest, even though she knew no one would force Ella to do anything. Ella entered, teddy bear still clutched to her chest. Billy followed his movements, calm and familiar, as if this were any other day. She sat on the rug. Billy lay beside her. And then Ella began to draw. For the first time, she reached for more paper. For the first time, she drew 3 people. A woman with long hair lying on the floor, a man standing in the distance, holding something sharp in his hand. And the third figure was Billy, positioned protectively in front of a short-haired girl. From the colors, character positions, the way Ella's eyes shifted, the way she whispered to Billy, even the faint changes in her face. Psychologists slowly began piecing together a fragile map of memories that had stayed locked inside her for too long. That night, Nolan and Sandra Klein reviewed the footage together. When Billy touched Ella's shoulder while she was drawing the man with the weapon, her heart rate spiked, her face shifted. But she didn't stop drawing. Nolan said quietly, "She's remembering something." And Billy caught it. Sandra stayed silent for a long while, then finally said, "We may not have a verbal statement, but we have biometric evidence, psychological behavior patterns, and therapeutic confirmation. It's enough to submit for forensic review. We're taking Billy into the courtroom with a collar camera. And if Ella chooses to walk into that room with him, then every word of her testimony might begin with a touch." That morning, Maplewood felt colder than usual. A dense fog blanketed the town, swallowing rooftops and trees alike, as if the whole place had been drawn into a dream with no clear end. But inside the Beckings County Special Trauma Unit, a small room was being carefully prepared. Not for a suspect, not for a doctor, but for a 6-year-old girl and her 4-legged guardian. They called it the Natural Communication Room. The front wall was fitted with two-way glass, completely hiding the observers on the other side. There were no microphones, no visible cameras, except for one, a tiny recording device built into Billy's collar, designed to capture low whispers within close range. Inside the room, the space was laid out like a child's quiet corner. Soft carpet stacks of picture books, boxes of crayons, blank papers scattered across a low table. A small whiteboard leaned against the far wall, available for sketching or scribbling anything at any moment. In one corner, a rocking chair waited under the pale shaft of sunlight, filtering through the window, casting faint shadows across the rug. Today, no adults would enter the room. Only Ella and Billy. When the door opened, Ella froze. She wore a beige sweater and clutched her teddy bear close, an anchor, an instinct she never abandoned. Billy stepped forward first, stopping just at the threshold. He turned to her, his eyes calm, steady, as if saying, "Come with me." Ella looked at him, then at the unfamiliar room, a moment of hesitation. Then she followed. Billy walked beside her, quiet as morning wind. The door closed behind them, and behind the glass, the entire team, therapists, prosecutors, officers, and Margaret, watched in stillness as though holding a single delicate thread that stretched between darkness and light. Ella didn't speak. She walked straight to the small table and sat. Billy lay underneath, resting his head on her legs. A minute passed, then 5. Ella reached for a sheet of paper. She picked up a crayon and began to draw, each stroke careful, as if every line surfaced from somewhere deep, a place where memory had been buried under silence. She drew a house first, a red roof, an open door, a window with no curtains. Then a woman, long hair, a featureless oval face with just 2 black dots. Next to her stood a man, tall, wearing a black coat, his eyes drawn in with a heavy gray, making the figure appear cold, almost hollow. Then suddenly Ella leaned down and whispered something to Billy. No one behind the glass could hear it, but Billy's collar camera, built to capture sound within inches, picked up the words. Barely audible, broken like breath, but clear. He didn't knock. He smelled like alcohol. Mommy screamed. I hid behind the curtain. A therapist beside Margaret looked up. She's telling the story. Margaret gripped the fabric of her coat tightly, her heart pounding. Inside the room, Ella paused her drawing, bowed her head. Billy lifted his nose, gently touched her hand. She stroked his head softly, and then she drew something else. A kite. It was green, large brights standing out against the gray and brown tones that filled the rest of the page. Billy raised his head again. His eyes followed the kite, unmoving. Ella whispered again, so faint the audio had to be enhanced to hear it fully. That kite was mine. Mommy said not to let him take it. But he brought it into the room. At that very moment, a forensic specialist behind the glass leaned forward and whispered, "The green kite? Could it be something the mother was hiding?" Margaret's eyes widened. She remembered it now. When sorting through Mila's belongings at the hospital, she'd seen a torn toy box, and inside scraps of green fabric. "We need to re-examine the scene," one officer said, already pulling out his phone to make the call. Back in the room, Ella had placed her drawing to the side. She sat still, both hands resting gently on Billy's head, patting softly, as if trying to calm herself. That picture would later become Ella's first piece of testimony. Not in words, but in images, validated through biometric data and behavioral analysis. From the man in the black coat to the green kite. Every detail matched with witness statements, the timeline of Grayson's past visits, and even discrepancies in his alibi that he had denied. The first twist in the case had emerged. From what seemed like a meaningless child's kite. And it all started because a little girl whispered her truth to a dog wearing a camera around his neck. The therapy room remained unchanged. The slanted sunlight falling across the rug, the soft breeze whispering through the cracked window, setting the background rhythm for the memories slowly rising from Ella's silence. After the session with the green kite, the entire team sat quietly for hours, replaying the footage again and again. And in the end, they all agreed. Let her keep drawing. Let her keep whispering. Because within that silence, a door was opening. One that no direct question could ever force open. On the third day of the special therapy sessions, Ella walked into the room without her teddy bear. She held Billy's paw tightly for a moment, then released it when she reached the art table. Billy lay beside her, just close enough for her to feel him, but never intruding on her space. Ella reached first for a red crayon. That alone made one of the analysts behind the glass lean closer. She drew a house again, a door, just like before. But this time, she didn't stop there. Ella added deep red streaks trailing out from the door across the floor. It was blood. Then came a hand. Not her own, but a large adult hand with a gash across the top. She added pale blue veins with eerie precision. She shaded the hand in ashen gray, then paused for a long time. Billy slowly lifted his head and gently pressed his chin onto Ella's knee, as if to ask, "Are you okay?" Ella looked down, pressed her lips together, then continued. Next, a knife. She drew it at an angle, blade pointed downward, handled jet black. She didn't add blood to the knife. She didn't need to. The image said it all. A visual language expert whispered, "This isn't imagination anymore. This is a memory." Ella stopped drawing. She exhaled, then leaned toward Billy and whispered. The camera on his collar recorded every fragile word. Barely there, but when enhanced and filtered, a clear phrase emerged, repeated over and over. It wasn't that man. Not that man. Again and again. Then her tone shifted slightly, correcting herself as though clarifying something in her own mind. He had a black coat. The other one didn't. Behind the glass, Margaret nearly broke down in tears. For days, everyone believed Grayson, Mila's ex-boyfriend, was the prime suspect. But now, Ella, through her whispers and drawings, was challenging that very idea. A criminologist narrowed his eyes, flipping through a tablet of case notes. Grayson was wearing a light gray shirt with a cigarette burn that day. She's saying clearly, he had a black coat. The room tensed. For the first time, doubt fractured the suspicion that had long pointed to one man. And this doubt wasn't emotional. It was grounded in behavioral analysis, image-based cognition, and high-sensitivity audio forensics. Later that day, the forensic team returned to Mila's home. In a back drawer behind the living room shelf, they found a black coarse fabric coat, stuffed behind old magazines. No fingerprints. But caught in a seam near the collar, a single strand of auburn hair. Preliminary DNA testing ruled it out as Grayson's. The next morning, Ella entered the therapy room again. She didn't look around. She just sat pulled out fresh paper and continued to draw. This time, there were two men. The first stood close to her mother, wearing gray hands by his side. The second, further back in black, holding a knife. Ella added a scar to the hand of the man in gray, a detail consistent with Grayson's injury from a fight months prior. But it was the man in black, whose hand she marked with blood. Then she whispered again. Billy stayed still, only tilting his head, as if to better hear her. I was hiding behind the curtain. Mommy said, "Don't come out." I saw him grab her hand. Mommy said no. Then something broke, and the other man ran away. Once more, her voice repeated like a fragile echo from the depths of memory. Not that man, the man in black. Experts confirmed Ella was distinguishing clearly between two individuals. Grayson was present in the house. But he wasn't the one who committed the attack. The man in the black coat, still unidentified, was the figure Ella had been referencing all along. Through her drawings and whispers, a new lead had emerged, one that shattered every initial assumption. That day, the sun broke unusually bright over Maplewood, as if, after so many gray days, the town itself was straining to let in just a little more light. In the therapy room, Ella sat quietly by the window, hugging her knees, watching golden leaves fall gently across the yard. Billy lay beside her, his head resting on her leg like a loyal sentinel who needed no commands. Each session, Ella walked in silently, Drew whispered. But today, she didn't draw. She simply stroked Billy's ear and leaned toward him, whispering so softly only the collar mic could catch it. The kite broke. Mommy said not to be upset. She hid it inside the blue music box. The entire observation room fell still. Margaret turned to look at Sandra Klein, the prosecutor, and then to Nolan, her eyes holding a fragile, flickering hope. What did she say? Nolan asked softly. The kite. Her mom hid it in a blue music box. Sandra repeated, her voice slow like a puzzle piece finally falling into place. The footage was replayed, audio enhanced. Through the background rustling came Ella's whisper. The blue music box. With a lock. Mommy put it inside. Immediately, a forensic team was dispatched again, back to Mila's house, the scene of the crime. The house had been searched many times before, but no one had thought to check a child's toy or a music box. That same afternoon, in the temporary evidence storage room of the investigation office, the worn boxes from Mila's home were brought out one by one. An old coat, children's toys, comic books with torn spines, a cracked photo frame, and several nameless items long buried in dust and time. A young officer named Kyle crouched down, opening each box with the quiet patience of someone who had lived long with suspicion. Then he paused. At the bottom of a damp, water-stained cardboard box, nestled between crumpled wrapping paper and scraps of green fabric, he found it. A small sea-green music box. Palm-sized, domed lid. A tiny rusted lock. Kyle called out, "I found it." The box was sent immediately to the forensics lab, old, chipped at the edges. But when set on the table and tilted slightly, a faint chime still played a twisted, broken fairy tale melody warped by time. They picked the lock. Inside, cushioned beneath moldy cotton stuffing, was a small black cylindrical object, a mini camera. Margaret nearly lost her footing when she saw it. "Mila once told me," she whispered, "she didn't trust anyone. She said if anything ever happened, she'd keep the proof herself." It took the tech team nearly 6 hours to extract data from the old memory card. Most of the footage was damaged by moisture and age. But one short clip, less than 40 seconds, remained. The image was grainy, shaky, but intact enough to hold its weight in silence. Everyone gathered around the screen. The footage began a skewed camera angle from under a table, likely Mila's living room. Low light, tilted view, but clear enough that no one in the room moved or breathed. A man stepped into frame wearing a black coat. His face wasn't visible, only his upper torso and black leather shoes with scuffed heels. Then came Mila's voice, high trembling but unmistakably clear. "What are you doing here? I told you not to come back." A man's voice followed, deep, strained with menace. "You thought you could hide it from me." Then a loud crash, something hitting the floor. And finally, a small voice from afar, "Mommy." The screen went black. The clip ended. In the debrief room, no one spoke for several minutes. Then Chief Nolan stood, his eyes dark with weight. "We have visual. We have audio. We have camera evidence. And everything Ella whispered lines up." Sandra clenched her hands. "The only problem is, the man in the black coat still hasn't been identified. But we know it's not Grayson, and Ella, a 6-year-old child, couldn't have fabricated those exact matches unless she witnessed them." Margaret whispered, "It was Billy." He opened that door. That night, Ella didn't go to the therapy room. She sat quietly in Margaret's backyard, wrapped in a thin blanket, her eyes tracing the stars scattered across the evening sky. Billy lay beside her. He raised his head and looked at her with quiet devotion. Ella spoke softly. "Do you know why Mommy hid the kite?" "So he couldn't find it." Billy rested his head gently on her lap. A moment of peace, between pain remembered and trust rebuilt. The data from the mini camera was processed again, this time with federal-grade imaging software. The tech team enhanced contrast, corrected lighting, and slowed every frame. Each pixel became a puzzle piece of truth. At the 17th second of the short clip, the living room light flickered, twice. And in that flash of shifting brightness, part of the man's face appeared in the space between two shadows. Not clear, not front-facing, but just enough a pair of thin, silver-rimmed glasses, neatly slicked-back hair, and a small birthmark just below the left ear. "Freeze that frame," Nolan said, gripping the back of his chair. Everyone in the surveillance room leaned in, distorted, yes, but unmistakable. That man wasn't Grayson. Margaret squinted, tilting her head, then whispered to herself, "He looks familiar." Sandra Klein opened the personnel file binder, flipping quickly through the photos of everyone involved. Grayson, neighbors, officers, forensic staff, none matched. Until Margaret suddenly stood eyes wide. "Wait, that's Elmer." The lawyer, Hayden Elmer, court-appointed defense attorney for Grayson Hale. He had been present at every meeting, every hearing, always loudly criticizing the use of unproven testimony and emotional manipulation of a minor witness. He wore a kind smile. His glasses gave him a look of reason and warmth. And maybe that's why no one had ever questioned him. Sandra rapidly pulled up internal court system files, license photos, employment records. When Elmer's ID photo appeared on screen, everyone leaned in. Silver glasses, check. Slicked hair, check. And there it was, the faint birthmark below the left ear. Nolan hissed under his breath. "It can't be," Sandra whispered. and he claimed he only contacted Mila by email, said he was too busy to meet in person. That night, police obtained an emergency search warrant for the law office where Hayden Elmer practiced. The warrant was approved in under an hour, immediately following the inclusion of the recovered video into sealed case files. In a locked drawer in Elmer's private office, they found a handwritten notebook. One page read, "She threatened to tell everything. Grayson is a fool, but easy to control. Green kite, still missing. Ella." She can't say anything. Another page was violently scratched out, almost torn. "If she opens the camera, it's all over." Nolan looked up from the notebook and turned to Kyle, the young officer who had first found the music box. "We're no longer looking at domestic assault. This is evidence destruction, premeditated." In a closed briefing with the prosecution and witness protection unit, Sandra Klein stated Elmer had a questionable history with Mila. Years ago, she left his law firm after filing internal complaints of financial misconduct. Margaret nodded slowly. "Mila once told me there was someone from her past who wouldn't leave her alone. But she never said who. Now we can assume." He returned, used Grayson's situation, hid behind his title as a defense lawyer, to control the narrative and divert suspicion. Meanwhile, Ella, unaware of the storm her drawings and whispers had stirred, sat beside Billy drawing once again. This time there was no blood, no knives, no shadows. She drew a hill, a kite flying high, and a smiling woman in the distance. At her feet, a brown dog looking up at the sky. Margaret lowered her head, tears falling silently. She remembered, and she moved through it. By the end of the day, a formal decision was made. Hayden Elmer would be summoned, no longer as a defense attorney, but as the second suspect in the case of Mila Jensen. Sandra held Margaret's hand as they stepped out of the briefing room, her gaze lost in the distance. "There are faces we thought belonged to the light. But only when the darkness reflects back do we see their true lines." Early morning in Maplewood. The fog had yet to lift. Police vehicles rolled silently through damp streets, turning corners as if gliding through a dream. The investigation had now entered its most confidential phase. One by one, those once seen as allies were quietly being reconsidered. At the Beckings County Data Center, the Special Investigation Team was instructed to retrieve Hayden Elmer's GPS records over the past 3 months, including vehicle tracking email logs and cell tower data. A long spreadsheet was printed stretching across the table. Nolan, Sandra, and a tech analyst sat across from one another. The timeline spanned from March 18th, 1 week before the assault, to the present. On the night of the attack, Hayden's phone data revealed a 42-minute stop near Mila Jensen's home from 7:54 to 8:36 p.m. After that, the phone went completely dark. It wasn't turned back on until past 10 p.m., this time located nearly 40 miles away downtown. Sandra clenched the folder. He claimed he was in a meeting with a client, but there's no email confirmation. And why turn off the phone for over 90 minutes? Nolan's voice was low, eyes still locked on the map. Maybe he didn't realize that tiny camera would be the anchor dragging him back to the scene. While the team followed every thread, Ella spent another quiet morning with Billy at the therapy center. She had started to open up, not with full sentences, but with more frequent drawings, richer colors, and above all, by whispering a name, though not fully. "Hay, Hay. Mr. Hay?" Margaret, who recorded each session, looked up toward Billy. The dog had formed a new habit, resting his chin gently on the table as Ella drew, never interrupting but always watching attentively. "Hey, Hay," she repeated, this time clearer, paired with a new drawing. No more houses, no knives, no blood. Ella drew a tall building with a spiral staircase running down the front. At the bottom, a glass door with a rectangular sign above it. A staff observer immediately snapped a photo and compared it to office buildings near where Ella had lived. It took less than 30 minutes to confirm the building matched the law office where Hayden Elmer worked. When Sandra was shown the drawing, she said only one thing: she's naming him. In her own way. Nolan nodded. We've got the GPS data, the video, the child's whispered words, and now a drawing that visually locates the suspect's workplace. Everything is closing in. In a closed meeting between law enforcement, the district attorney, and trauma specialists, Margaret made a bold suggestion. Let's show her a lineup of portraits. If she recognizes him, she'll react. A sheet of 9 photos was printed. Grayson Hayden healthcare staff, a bus driver, and several unrelated men from town. The session was held in the usual therapy room. Ella walked in as always, Billy trailing behind her. The photos were laid out on the table. Ella looked. At first, no reaction. But when her eyes reached the 7th photo, Hayden Elmer, his silver-rimmed glasses catching the room's faint light, Ella froze. She turned to Billy, gently placed a hand on his head, and whispered, "Hey, hey." Margaret inhaled sharply. Sandra, standing behind the observation glass, clenched her fist. Ella pointed again. This time she pressed her small finger firmly against the image. "Hey, hey, angry with Mommy." Nothing could have been clearer. That very night, the investigative team secured an arrest warrant for Hayden Elmer on multiple charges: unlawful entry, witness tampering, suspected aggravated assault, evidence destruction and concealment, abuse of authority as a legal representative. Elmer was arrested immediately after leaving the courthouse, ironically just after delivering his final defense on behalf of Grayson Hale. At the therapy center, Ella sat by the window holding a freshly drawn picture still wet with color. She'd drawn a spiral staircase. A dog stood on the steps, looking up at a man walking away. Above the man's head, Ella had scribbled in shaky letters, "Hey, Den." Margaret saw it. She reached out and gently touched Billy's shoulder. "You've spoken in your own way, Ella. And he heard you. With his whole heart." The skies over Maplewood darkened early that evening, heavy clouds drifting in from the lake like an omen. Not of a snowstorm, but of a courtroom like none before, where a 6-year-old girl once silent for months would take her first step toward justice. Not with words, but with drawings, with presence, with trust. And always, by the side of her silent companion, Billy. The special courtroom had been prepared a week in advance. A warm space, soft lighting, pale wood walls, large windows facing a garden. No witness stand, no microphones, no robes or badges. Just a small round table, a few blue cushioned chairs, and a whiteboard for drawing. This was Ella's courtroom, a space linked to the real one via one-way live stream. Ella wouldn't see the observers, but they could see and hear everything. The hallway leading there wasn't long, but for Ella, it was the longest walk since the day she'd hidden behind a curtain and watched her mother collapse in blood. Today, she walked it herself. No one carried her. No one held her hand. Only Billy walked beside her. Wearing a soft yellow scarf, the symbol of the Special Witness Support Program. 2 silhouettes. One small, clutching a faded teddy bear. One steady, calm, step by step, carving a path through stillness. The wooden door opened. Billy stopped, turned his head toward Ella. She stopped too, her grip tightening around the bare eyes focused on the softly lit room ahead. She bent down, touched Billy's ear, then whispered, for the first time before stepping into a public space, a full, unbroken sentence, I'm ready now. Behind the glass, Margaret's tears finally fell. She turned to Sandra. "We didn't place our trust in the wrong soul." Sandra nodded, hand resting over her heart. She doesn't need a representative. She has a friend, and he's the bridge. The trial began. But instead of conventional testimony, the court approved an unprecedented method. A child's statement, delivered through interaction with a therapy dog and recorded using behavior mapping cameras and sensory microphones. Ella sat down at the small table, a stack of paper in front of her colored markers, neatly lined up, and Billy curled up quietly at her feet. No one urged her to speak. She was free to whisper to Billy, and every sound, no matter how faint, was captured by the special microphone system for the investigation. At first, she sketched only simple shapes, a room, a curtain, a shadowy figure standing just beyond the frame. Then she reached out, gently, wrapped her arms around Billy's head, pressing her cheek against his ear, and whispered, "I miss Mommy so much. She told me I had to be strong." That single sentence, shaky and tender, caused every adult behind the glass to fall into stunned silence. Then slowly, Ella picked up a black marker. She drew a coat, then a pair of shoes, then a spiral staircase. But this time, something changed. Instead of looking only at Billy, she lifted her gaze, eyes steady facing the small surveillance camera in the corner of the room. No more avoidance. No more retreat. "He told Mommy not to say anything. Mommy said there was a recording. He pushed her. Then... Her voice cracked. Tears rimmed her eyes, but she kept whispering, "Billy knows." Billy lifted his head just slightly and licked her hand. An instinctive gesture from one wounded soul to another, a quiet affirmation that she wasn't alone. 30 minutes later, the judicial panel convened privately. And for the first time in Beckings County's courtroom history, a child's whispered statement, captured and validated by behavioral mapping and audio-enhanced technology in the presence of a therapy dog, was ruled admissible. Grayson, once under suspicion, was officially removed from the primary suspect list. Hayden Elmer, with mounting evidence, was now the prime suspect. He was held without bail. That evening, Billy was brought to the hospital garden, where Ella sat alone looking up at the stars. She turned when she saw him, gave the tiniest smile, then walked over and gently rested her hand on his head. "Let's draw again tomorrow, Billy." And for the first time, without prompting, Ella began to hum a quiet tune. An old melody, soft and wavering, the same one from a small blue music box that had once hidden a buried truth. There were no clear lyrics. But the adults didn't need words. All they needed to know was this: a 6-year-old girl had found her voice again. And it all began with a dog who didn't speak, but listened, with his whole heart. The wind skimmed gently across the rooftops of the care center, carrying with it a cold as delicate as silk and the far-off rustle of forest trees, leaves brushing against each other, the occasional owl calling from the misty woods. Above, the night sky over Maplewood was strangely clear. The stars shimmered as though freshly combed, each constellation outlined in perfect clarity. Ella lay curled on a small bed tucked inside a pale gray blanket. Her eyes were open, gazing at the ceiling, though her mind drifted far from wood and nails and light bulbs. In her thoughts, the world had floated gently back into the past, where lullabies whispered softly, where warm hands brushed her hair and the scent of her mother lingered in the golden light of fading afternoons. "Sleep now, my little kite, soar high above the hills, Mommy's watching close behind. Fear no storm, no wind, no chill." The lullaby wasn't pretty. It wasn't loud. But to Ella, it was the last thing left of her mother. A song with no title, a breath-soft tune made of memory. She remembered vividly the day everything shattered. Her mother had sat on the floor, pulling Ella tightly into her arms, whispering that lullaby one final time. Behind the curtain, there was the sound of doors slamming, angry shouting, and the shattering of glass. Her mother had turned her back, shielding Ella with her own body. Then, panting breaths, the smell of blood, and a darkness so thick it swallowed the room. Now Billy lay quietly beside Ella, his head resting gently on her thigh. He was still awake as always. His ears twitched now and then at unfamiliar sounds, but soon settled again, comforted by the steady, calm rhythm of the child's breathing beside him. Ella reached out to stroke his ears, then pointed to the window, where moonlight draped silver across the branches of a maple tree, shedding its last leaves. "Look, Mommy's kite." Across the way, someone had hung a paper kite from a rooftop, a simple handmade toy bamboo frame and soft fabric tail. It didn't fly, but in the breeze its wings trembled as if waving gently. Ella whispered again, unclear if she spoke to Billy or to herself. "Tomorrow I'll speak. I'll tell them about Mommy's song and the coat that smelled like cigarettes." Billy didn't move. He simply leaned forward and pressed a quiet lick to her hand, his way of saying, "Yes, you can." Bathed in the moonlight spilling through the window, Ella raised her hand into the air, drawing with invisible lines a kite, a smiling face, and an open hand reaching out. In her memory, her mother had never scolded, never abandoned. Even in hardship, in exhaustion, on days when dinner was only bread and milk, her mother had always created a world of peace. And now, with people beginning to believe the whispers with Billy always beside her, Ella understood silence could no longer protect anything. Because if she remained quiet, her mother would be remembered only as the woman who died without a voice. But if she spoke, her mother would be heard one last time, through her. Out in the hallway, Margaret stood quietly, a cup of tea long gone cold in her hand. Through the slightly open door, she saw Ella and Billy, a still life more powerful than any courtroom argument. No dramatics, no speeches, just a bond, quiet and whole. Margaret turned, wiped her eyes, and glanced at the clock. Tomorrow at 6 a.m., the official trial would begin. Ella, a 6-year-old child, would be the central witness. And Billy, a dog who could not speak but always listened and always led, would walk beside her. That night, Maplewood slept under a fragile peace. On Sandra's desk, files stacked high, but only one was pressed between soft leather. Ella's crayon drawing of a mother hiding a kite behind her back. And a door slowly opening behind her. Because sometimes truth doesn't need to shout to be heard. It only needs one look, one breath, and one heart that refuses to let go. Inside the courtroom, shafts of light cut across the wooden floor like fractured sunbeams. It was an early autumn morning, and Maplewood's skies hung low and gray. A chill breeze slipped through tightly shut windows, but inside the air was thick, heavy, waiting. All eyes were fixed on the large monitor, where Ella, seated in the special room beside Billy, was preparing for the most silent confrontation of her life. At the far end in the main chamber, Hayden Elmer still wore his usual polished demeanor. Black suit, quiet gray tie, silver-rimmed glasses. He sat between two newly appointed defense attorneys, hands clasped calmly. But his eyes, just for a split second, flinched, because on the screen, a small girl had appeared. She sat beside a German shepherd named Billy, clutching a teddy bear and a bundle of drawings. Ella tilted her head. She looked neither at the screen nor the people watching behind the one-way glass. She only looked at Billy and whispered something small, something soft, something only he could hear. And the camera on his collar faithfully recorded it all. After a few seconds of silence, Ella pulled out a drawing, placed it on the easel in front of her, then took half a step back. On the paper was the image of a man in a black coat standing just behind an open door frame. In front of him, a woman held a small child in her arms. The man's eyes were blank. No pupils, just two hollow dark voids. Below the image, in a crooked, wobbly handwriting, childlike but bold, deliberate and intentional, were the words, "He took the knife from his coat pocket." Inside the courtroom, the entire panel of judges and all parties involved fell into stunned silence. A few people stood up and walked closer to the monitor for a better look. No one spoke. As if every question, every doubt, every argument raised so far had been completely silenced by that single innocent sentence. It was the first time Ella had ever written something down herself since the tragedy happened. Sandra turned to the lead prosecutor. There is no statement more powerful than that. A 6-year-old child drawing and writing a specific action that aligns perfectly with physical evidence and surrounding testimonies. The prosecutor nodded, lips pressed tightly. This isn't just about drawings or whispers anymore. We now have direct, written testimony. On the other side of the screen, Hayden Elmer squinted at the drawing, his facial muscles twitching slightly, just enough for the courtroom cameras to catch. One of his lawyers leaned in to whisper, likely urging him to remain calm. But Elmer looked away, lowering his eyes to the floor. No one could say what he was thinking. But Ella's silence, that quiet presence, was the harshest cross-examination he had ever faced. Billy gently rested his chin on Ella's lap and gave her hand a soft lick. The girl smiled faintly, then without warning turned her head to look directly into the camera. It was the first time Ella had willingly looked at the image of Elmer, even if only through a screen. Her gaze held no hatred, no fear, only the calm, clear recognition of a child who had remembered everything and chosen the moment to speak. Then came a whispered phrase captured clearly by the room's microphone system. "I remember him. Black coat. Cigarette smell. Mommy said to shut the door," he yelled. The clarity of her voice was undeniable, and when played back, the courtroom speakers echoed like a final accusation. In the official record later filed, the presiding judge noted, although the child witness did not testify through traditional verbal methods, the use of visual, symbolic, and whisper-guided testimony, facilitated by therapeutic dog interaction, is hereby accepted as legally valid. Based on the precedent set by North Point Case 2021 and Article 42, Clause 6 of the Child Psychological Protection Act. Ella said nothing more. She simply gathered her drawings, folded them neatly, then turned to embrace Billy's neck tightly. "Can Mommy hear me now?" she whispered, eyes looking up toward the ceiling. No one answered. Only the breeze stirred the glass door, nudging a paper kite outside into motion, its tail fluttering gently, as if someone far away was nodding. When the screen went dark, the courtroom erupted in emotion. And in a quiet corner, the man who once wore the robes of justice finally bowed his head. Genuinely. There was nothing left to deny, nothing left to defend. Only a 6-year-old girl and a silent dog, the most powerful witnesses justice had ever known. No one expected a dog to become the center of a serious criminal trial. But in Maplewood, where the autumn wind always carried the scent of fallen leaves and buried secrets, it had happened. Billy, a German shepherd once trained for PTSD therapy, and children didn't need to bark, growl, or perform any heroic act. He simply walked beside a little girl, and that quiet presence became a language of its own, honest and undeniable. That night, the audio lab at Beckings County's data center stayed lit until morning. Specialists worked on data retrieved from the camera mounted on Billy's collar, a high-definition recording device with spatial audio capable of capturing even the softest whispers within a meter. They replayed the footage from the night Ella had fallen asleep, hugging her teddy bear Billy resting at her feet. At first it was uneventful. Just the wind through the window, the steady breathing of a sleeping child, the quiet shifting of a dog. But at exactly 2:36 a.m., a broken sound, like sleep talking, was detected. The team enhanced the frequency, filtered the noise, boosted the amplitude, and ran keyword recognition software. The results made everyone freeze. Hayden. The word was slurred unclear, but the audio software confirmed a 94.3% match in voice signature. And that wasn't all. Over the next 4 minutes, the same word was repeated 3 times, interspersed with disjointed phrases. In the cold room. Don't let mommy see. Knife in the coat pocket. Each word like a shard, fragmented, scattered. But when pieced together, they formed a vivid mosaic of a truth Ella had been unable to speak while awake. The transcript was immediately forwarded to the prosecutor's office. Sandra, who received the report, read and reread the final line. Audio data confirms the word Hayden, repeated 3 times during elevated anxiety and sleep as measured by heart and respiratory rates. Voice identified as Ella Jensen. The next morning, at an emergency judicial meeting, the recording was played in a sealed chamber. Only 7 people were present. But when the sound played, everyone held their breath. A child's voice, halting and drowsy, calling into the dark, "Hey, Den." Then cold room. "Mommy. Mommy, he has a knife." One judge removed his glasses and pressed a hand to his forehead, silent for a very long time. Back at the therapy center, Billy sat beside Ella as usual. But today, something had changed. The little girl was drawing a white room with steel doors and cold blue lights. She didn't say a word. She just drew. When Margaret gently asked, "Where is this place, Ella?" the girl whispered, "The cold place, where he took mommy first." The data from Billy's collar, though it didn't capture a clear image of the perpetrator, opened a new direction for the investigation. Police began reviewing all abandoned cold storage units and warehouses near Ella's former neighborhood, cross-referencing with Hayden's GPS records on the night of the incident. One location matched: a defunct freezing facility in the southern industrial zone. No security cameras. But Hayden had a 12-minute stop there, according to his route history. Authorities launched a full search of the site. That evening, during a press briefing, the court's spokesperson made an unprecedented statement. "We are now officially considering audio data recorded via a therapy dog's collar-mounted camera as valid evidence, because the voice of the sole surviving child has been preserved clearly, objectively, and without manipulation." When asked how she felt, Sandra simply said one sentence. It wasn't Billy who spoke for Ella. It was Billy who held what Ella didn't dare say out loud. And when the time came, he spoke in his own way. That evening, Ella sat beside Billy in the yard, where the street lamp cast velvet soft golden streaks onto the grass. She was no longer afraid of the wind, no longer avoided the questions. Ella leaned close to the dog, resting her head on Billy's back, and whispered, "You'll come with me again tomorrow. Right, Billy? We still have so much to tell." Billy turned his head, let out a gentle sneeze, then settled again. His eyes fixed on the moonlight above. In that quiet glow, the two of them, a little girl and a dog, looked like night sentinels guarding the most fragile truths with the only things they had: patience, trust, and a silent friendship. The trial entered its 3rd week, and the entire town of Maplewood felt like it was holding its breath. Conversations at morning cafes gradually shifted. From doubt to anticipation. The man once known as a champion of justice, a lecturer at the local law school, now sat in the defendant's chair. And now, as each thread of evidence came together, the winds were beginning to turn. The GPS log from Hayden Elmer's car on the night of the incident had been recovered by the police digital forensics team through a nearby cell tower's signal. At first, it was just a faint dot. His car stopping in an abandoned industrial zone south of town at exactly 10:47 p.m. That's the same time Ella mentioned the cold room. The lead investigator pointed to the map. And at that exact moment, Her mother's phone went completely offline. Then came the traffic camera footage. Elmer had claimed he was home reading with his wife that night. But an infrared roadside camera captured a black sedan. License plate 8AE217, his vehicle, just 3 kilometers from the crime scene at 10:40 p.m. The timeline revealed a 7-minute window. Enough time to reach the scene, commit the act, and leave. It wasn't just the digital evidence. The witness statements, too, began falling into place like puzzle pieces. Dr. Robin Vance, Ella's trauma therapist, was called to the stand. I cannot identify the perpetrator, but I can confirm that during Ella's episodes of sleep talking, she consistently repeated the same sensory triggers: a man in a black coat, the smell of cigarettes, and the whispered phrase, "Don't let mommy see." All of those match Mr. Elmer's appearance habits and exact words during his initial hospital visitation. Robin continued, eyes fixed on the defendant's bench. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the clerk flipping pages. Hayden Elmer, pale lips drawn tight, was asked to take the stand. He swallowed hard. Gone was the cold composure of earlier sessions, replaced now by constant blinking and fists clenched too tightly. "You said you hadn't left the house since 8 p.m. But why does your vehicle's GPS show it 20 kilometers away, near the industrial zone, close to 11 p.m., the prosecutor asked. "Maybe someone borrowed the car," Elmer stammered. "It's an encrypted vehicle, fingerprint locked. Only you and your wife have access," the prosecutor pressed. "Maybe I went for a walk. I don't really remember." "Do you often walk to abandoned factories?" The prosecutor's voice was sharp steel. Elmer said nothing. Then came the playback. Ella's whispered voice. "Hayden, cold room," captured from the camera on Billy's collar. Elmer froze. His eyes darted across the room, as if searching for a way out among the stares that no longer believed him. And still, it didn't end there. Police revealed 2 more witnesses, former clients of Elmer, both single mothers who had previously filed protective orders against him. The reports had been overlooked or dismissed as insufficient evidence. But after Ella's case, both women came forward again, this time with handwritten threats, anonymous messages, and even a voice recording. In one audio file, Elmer could be heard saying, "I won't let anyone destroy the image I've built. Remember that." These fragments, once scattered, now formed a solid wall cornering Elmer from both legal and public sides. His defense team grew visibly uneasy. One requested a recess citing media pressure. Another asked for a psychiatric evaluation for Elmer, questioning his cognitive state during the incident. But everyone knew. The picture was clear now. That night back at the center, Ella lay nestled into Billy's side, her cheek on his fur. "I saw him. On the screen. I remember," she whispered. Margaret, seated across from them, nodded gently. "You did so well, Ella." "No, it was Billy. Billy helped me draw, helped me remember." Outside, the early winter wind slipped through the window, nudging the paper kite someone had left hanging under the porch. It trembled. But it didn't fall. It stayed. Just like Ella. Just like Billy. And just like the truth. No matter how long buried, it would always rise into the light. That morning sunlight streamed through the blinds of the Maplewood Welfare Center's records room. The air smelled of dust, faded ink, and paper long forgotten, like a room time had quietly left behind. Margaret stood before a locked steel cabinet, where personal effects were kept for those lost or yet to be claimed. In her hands was a folder labeled "Hold, Jensen Lilly, deceased." She slowly opened the cabinet. Inside, among a few humble belongings, a worn wool scarf, an old coin purse, and a photo of Lily holding Ella beneath a maple tree, lay a yellowed envelope still sealed with delicate handwriting. "If someday, she needs to know." Margaret sat down and opened the letter carefully. The paper had turned soft and brittle, but the ink was still clear. To the one who will care for Ella, if I no longer can. I may seem overly cautious, but I feel something is wrong. He, the man I once trusted, has changed. He's paying too much attention to Ella, not in a loving way. I don't know who to tell, so I'm writing it down. If anything happens, please keep Billy with her. That dog is not just a pet. Billy is her friend, the only safety I can leave behind. I've arranged for him to be transferred to the nearest therapy center if things go wrong. If Ella won't speak, let Billy listen. She will speak, but not to people. To Billy. I believe. Lily Jensen. Margaret read it again and again, her fingers tightening around the letter as though afraid it might fall apart in her hands. Everything, every connection from before. Ella's way of reacting to Billy, how she always drew him in the center of her pictures, those whispered words at night, all finally made sense. It wasn't by chance that Billy came to Ella. It wasn't luck that assigned Billy as her therapy dog. It was a silent preparation, a will written in love. That afternoon, Margaret took Ella to the backyard of the center. The little girl was playing with a blue paper kite, exactly like the ones her mother used to make. Margaret sat down beside her, holding out an envelope. I have something. Your mother left it for you. Ella stared at the letter for a long time. She didn't open it. She just hugged it to her chest, her eyes red. Did Mom send Billy to me? Ella asked, her voice barely louder than the breeze. Margaret nodded gently. You see, your mother thought of everything. She left you a friend and a belief. Ella sat beside Billy, resting her head on his back, her eyes distant as if watching old memories unfold. I used to think Billy came because I was lucky, she whispered. It's not luck. Margaret smiled softly. It's love. Prepared ahead of time, waiting for the moment you needed it most. The next day, the letter was entered into the official court record. It wasn't treated like typical evidence. It was a testimony born of love from someone who was no longer here. Its contents aligned perfectly with the unfolding events, Billy arriving at the center. Immediately after the incident, Ella's exclusive connection to him, and the subtle details only a mother deeply in tune with her child could have anticipated. Inside the courtroom, the prosecutor read a pivotal line to the bench. If Ella says nothing, please let Billy listen. She will speak, not to people, but to Billy. Then he looked directly at the judge and said, This is not just a letter. This is a testimony, not to accuse, but to protect. And it worked. In the hallway where sunlight slanted through the old window panes, Ella sat on a long mahogany bench with Billy at her side. In her hands was a small wrapped package, her mother's letter, along with an old necklace with a green stone pendant. I'll wear it when I go to court, Ella said. You should, Margaret replied gently. Your mother will be right there. And so, in a world that often seems cold and merciless under the weight of law, a single handwritten letter, born out of fear and fierce love from a single mother, became a candle guiding the way to truth. Billy still walked beside Ella each day. But from that moment on, something shifted. He was no longer just the dog who helped her heal. He was the one entrusted, the one believed in, and the one loved, fully and forever. The therapy room that autumn afternoon seemed like any other. Gentle light streamed through the curtains, the wooden furniture glowed softly, and the children's colorful drawings still hung shyly on the walls, hesitant in line and color. Ella sat there, back straight, arms holding a worn teddy bear, while Billy rested his head quietly by her feet. For the first time, she had agreed to speak with her therapist directly. No one-way glass, no hidden microphone. Dr. Robin sat across from her, hands resting loosely on his knees, his gaze calm and waiting. Ella didn't look at him. She stared at the glass of water on the table, tilting her head slightly, as if listening to a song playing deep within her memory. She used to be terrified of sound, Robin once told Margaret. Wouldn't step out of her room unless Billy was right next to her. But today Ella spoke first. Her voice was soft, like a thread of silk unraveling in the air. Mom used to sing before bed, a song about a white rabbit and the moon. Robin simply nodded. She'd say, "If I'm not home tomorrow night, go to sleep early. I'll be there in your first dream." Ella paused, still staring at the water. Then she continued. Mom loved cooking dinner. Even when she was busy, she'd always try to cook. Once I asked why we didn't just buy something, and she said, "Because my food smells like me." Her voice cracked at the end. Billy lifted his head and gently licked her hand. Robin remained silent, giving her space. One time she forgot the way home, stopped the car in the middle of an intersection. She laughed and said, "My brain's just cotton now. Ella, I think I'm getting old." Ella smiled faintly, then fell quiet again. The night before it all happened, she hugged me tighter than usual. She said, "No matter what happens, you're the best thing I've ever had." Robin nodded, speaking softly for the first time. "And you're also the best thing she left behind for this world." In the days that followed, Ella began to speak more. Not of the terrible memories, but the tender ones. How her mom tied her hair, the porridge she made when Ella caught a cold, the knitted wool robe that didn't fit and became Billy's blanket instead. Small things. But the heart of a love cut short. The therapy notes reflected each step Ella has begun to tell stories. She's naming memories. The scars are no longer just wounds. They're now labeled love, courage, loss, Robin later told the court. Not everyone can talk about pain, but when a child once silenced by trauma can remember details so sweet, that is healing. One afternoon while coloring, Ella turned to Margaret and asked, "Do you know why I draw Mom so much?" Margaret smiled. "Because you love her." Ella shook her head. "Because if I don't draw, I'm afraid I'll forget the smell of her hair. I'm afraid I'll forget how she crinkled her nose when she laughed. That's why I keep drawing." Margaret pulled her into a tight hug. Her eyes stung with tears. One evening, Ella quietly approached Billy, lying beneath the fiery red maple tree behind the house. She sat down beside him, buried her face in his thick fur, and whispered, "I saw him hurt Mom that day, but I was too scared to run out. I just held my teddy and closed my eyes. Billy didn't move. I thought she'd be mad because I didn't help her. But now I get it. She helped me by sending you." The moonlight bathed Ella's hair in silver. Wind rustled the maple leaves above them. The whole scene felt like a silent lullaby, sung by a little girl learning to speak, using nothing but memory and bravery. Ella wrote on paper for the first time, "I still remember you, Mom. I'll tell people how amazing you were. And Billy will tell it with me, because Billy knows everything." Robin read the note and tucked it carefully into a private folder. Not a medical record, but the file of a soul, finding its voice again after the storm. Maplewood's town hall had never seen such a ceremony. On the old stone square beneath the golden light of early autumn, rows of chairs were neatly arranged before the steps. At the front stood a small podium and a brass plaque placed gently on an easel in honor of Billy, therapy companion and guide toward justice. No one in town had expected that the name engraved on the bronze plaque today would belong to a dog. But everyone understood without Billy, the truth might have forever remained buried in the shadows. Billy stepped onto the steps without a leash, guided only by a small hand gently holding the thick fur at his neck. Ella, in a simple white dress, her hair tied with a blue ribbon, walked beside him, each step slow and steady, as if she had practiced it 100 times before a mirror. The two central figures of the ceremony didn't need to speak. Their presence said everything that words couldn't. Cameras clicked. Reporters stood at the ready. But no one pushed forward. No one made a sound. Ella stopped by the plaque, bowed slightly, then turned to Billy and whispered something only he could hear. Billy lifted his head, tilting his ear toward her, as if truly listening. Then calmly sat beside the bronze stand, his eyes reflecting the soft light of the setting sun with a warm, quiet glow. The official report of the ceremony recorded it simply: no speeches. But in the silence, the entire town seemed to breathe in unison. Gratitude, respect, and quiet tears. As the crowd slowly dispersed, a few reporters lingered to jot down final notes. Ella remained on the steps with Billy gently running her fingers over the bronze plaque as if touching something alive, something sacred. A photographer approached and asked Ella, "Would you like a photo with Billy?" She nodded, then turned her face toward the sun, just beginning to dip behind the red-roofed buildings of town. The light painted a soft outline around her pink cheeks. Billy sat beside her, steady as always, his gaze focused toward the lens, as though he understood that this moment marked the end of a long journey. As the camera shutter clicked, Ella smiled, a real smile blooming from deep inside, where once there had only been fear and shadows. One photo, one frame, a quiet punctuation mark filled with hope for a long, aching story. That evening, news sites across the country posted the photo with the headline, "The Gatekeeper of Truth," the story of a dog and a 6-year-old girl that moved a nation. The photo was shared hundreds of thousands of times. But there was something no one could see in the frame. Tucked inside the pocket of Ella's dress was her mother's letter. And in that letter, a single line read, "Billy is the one who will knock for you. At the doors you cannot reach. He is the one who will wait in front of the truth until you're ready to arrive." Ella had arrived, and Billy had waited, every step of the way. The next morning in the small courtyard of the therapy center, Margaret called Ella outside holding a card in her hand. "Someone sent this for Billy." She smiled. "An honorary certificate from the State K-9 Academy." Ella gasped softly, then threw her arms around Billy's neck. "You're Professor Billy now." She laughed, her rosy cheeks glowing. Billy tilted his head as if nodding, then gently licked her hand, just like he always did when she was sad or scared. Only this time he wasn't wiping away tears. He was celebrating a smile. And from that moment on, even as Maplewood returned to its usual rhythm, even after the reporters left and the headlines faded, the story of Ella and Billy lived on, in the hearts of those who had witnessed it, in the children learning to speak again through love, and in the watchful eyes of dogs still waiting for a chance to become someone's silent guardian. Spring arrived in Maplewood like an unspoken song, drifting over red-tiled rooftops, settling on delicate white apple blossoms, and dancing along trees just beginning to turn green again. The town breathed as it always had, church bells ringing on Sunday mornings. The bakery near the post office, once again smelling of butter and warm milk, and children running barefoot through schoolyards, calling to one another with names that carried no weight of fear. But something had changed. Something unnamed, yet present in the way people paused slightly when walking past the town center. In the softened gaze of the elderly reading the paper. In the silent hand squeezes between young parents picking up their kids from preschool. Maplewood remembered. And the name they remembered was Billy. On the town's eastern edge, where there had once been an empty field between two aging buildings, a small park had been built. Not too big, just a few swings, a round sandpit, clusters of flowers along the path, and a long wooden bench under a maple tree. The name of the park, Billy's Circle. The idea had begun with a handwritten letter from a group of third graders sent to the town council, the handwriting uneven but heartfelt. "We want a place to play and to remember Billy, the dog who saved people." The council didn't need much convincing. 3 months later, Billy's circle was complete, on the day of Ella's 7th birthday. That morning, she walked barefoot across the soft grass, her white dress fluttering in the breeze. In her hand was a blue paper kite, simple and familiar with 2 slender bamboo ribs and a long twine tail, a silent symbol of the journey she had made. At the park's center, where the swings formed a circle around a low memorial, stood a bronze statue of Billy. The statue was life-sized, just the right height for children. He stood firm, head slightly tilted, eyes gazing forward as though standing watch, yet in that gaze was a strange gentleness. At his feet lay a real paper kite permanently attached to the stone. It had been painted a soft sky blue, just like the last kite Ella had held. The plaque beside the statue read, "Billy, companion, gatekeeper, a heart that speaks in silence." That afternoon, while Ella and the other children ran freely around the park, the townspeople stood quietly at a distance. No one stepped into that circle of joy, as if everyone instinctively knew today belonged to Ella and Billy. No one else. From afar, Margaret cleaned her glasses and smiled, watching the little girl race past. She remembered the early days, when Ella would sit motionless at the window clinging to a wrinkled teddy bear. And now she was running, laughing, living the childhood she was once robbed of. There was a fleeting moment that afternoon, when the wind picked up suddenly and the kite in Ella's hand took flight, twirling once around Billy's statue before gently landing by his paw. Ella ran over, picked it up, then sat beside the bronze figure. She touched the cool metal with both hands, lifted her face toward Billy's, and for a moment, her eyes weren't those of a child. They were the eyes of someone who had walked through loss, learned to stand and found the strength to forgive. "I still remember you," she whispered, "and I'll tell my friends about you." She turned to a group of children near the slide, smiled brightly and waved. "This is Billy," she said. "He's my friend." And he kept my mother's promise. By late afternoon, when the crowd had gone home, the golden light stretched across the small park like a layer of honey. Billy's bronze statue cast a long shadow on the ground, merging with the laughter and footsteps of children playing nearby. Amid the rustle of leaves and the soft breeze brushing against their hair, it almost sounded like the steady, quiet footsteps of a dog still patrolling, still keeping watch. That evening, the wind drifted gently from the lake. Behind the therapy center, golden sunlight bathed the stone steps, the wooden doorframe, and the wildflowers lining the fence. Billy lay resting with his head on Ella's lap, eyes half closed, ears softly perked. In that in-between state of being awake and dreaming, as if he could still hear the whole world, even in peace. The back door creaked open. A staff member stepped out, resting a gentle hand on the shoulder of a boy around 7. The boy stared at the ground, hands clutched together, until his knuckles turned pale. Ella turned. She didn't ask anything. She simply tilted her head slightly, then softly patted Billy's back. "You can sit here," she said, her voice quieter than the wind. The boy didn't answer. But after a pause, he stepped forward. Small, heavy steps, like he carried a storm inside. He sat on Billy's left, not too close, just enough to feel the warmth from the shepherd's steady, grounded body. Ella stayed on his right hand, resting gently on Billy's back, eyes watching the boy. Not with pity, but with a quiet knowing the way only someone who had once stood in that same place could understand. Time passed in silence, broken only by the rustling trees and the soft shift of Billy's fur as he moved slightly, nudging his nose toward the boy's hand. The boy flinched a little, but didn't pull away. Instead, he inched closer, just a little, and laid 2 fingers gently on Billy's back. Ella smiled and looked out at the sunlit yard where the wind carried a few yellow petals in the fading light of day. "He's like I used to be," she whispered. Maybe to herself, maybe to Billy, maybe to her mother somewhere above. Margaret stood watching from the staff window. She didn't interrupt. She knew some moments must remain untouched by words. A new journey had begun, not through talking, but through presence, through being there in the right way at the right time. In her therapy journal, she wrote simply, "Ella initiated contact with a new child for the first time." Billy, still the bridge between 2 silent souls. From that small yard, the scene looked like a painting full of feeling, a dog resting between 2 children, one who had walked through pain and one just beginning the journey of healing. In the sky above, the clouds turned amber, reflecting the sunset in Billy's eyes. In those eyes were patience, gentleness, and above all, unwavering belief in life, in hope, and in the return of laughter after loss. At one corner of the garden, the old blue paper kite Ella had always kept, now faded and slightly worn, hung from a low branch. It didn't fly anymore, but it was still there like a quiet reminder that every painful memory can be kept, not to reopen wounds, but to prove that we've survived and we're still here. As twilight fell and the path lights were turned on, Ella stood up, brushed off her dress, and turned to the boy. "Let's sit here again tomorrow, okay?" The boy didn't say anything, but this time he nodded. Billy slowly stood stretched, then looked back at them with a gaze that said, "Good job." He walked toward the center door, steady as ever, like a gatekeeper finishing his shift. Ella and the boy walked behind him side by side. 2 children, 1 dog, 1 perfect sunset. That night in her personal journal, Margaret wrote, "There were no miracles today. No loud voices, no sobbing, no one pouring out their pain. Just a dog lying between 2 children, as he always has. And perhaps that is the real miracle. In the emotional journey of Ella and Billy, what we witness is not just the unraveling of a buried truth, but the quiet, wondrous power of healing through love and the silent presence of a German shepherd whose loyalty spoke louder than words." Billy never needed to speak, never needed to prove himself. All he did was lie beside the child, rest his head on her hand, and wait, patiently, for trust to return. This story gently reminds us that every child deserves to be believed, protected, and truly heard, even when they remain silent. And sometimes the bridge between fear and hope looks like a dog with soft eyes and a heart that never gives up. The German Shepherd, more than a breed of courage and intelligence, is a living symbol of quiet devotion and emotional healing. Through Billy, we understand that animals are not just companions, but keepers of trust, justice, and light for those who have wandered too long in the dark. So let us love animals. Let us treasure these faithful souls. For in a world full of noise and chaos, perhaps they are the quiet doorways guiding us gently home.